Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and welcome to this plus 15 Halls of Atonement that I did a couple days ago. This was the Realm first plus 15, and I think the World 8th plus 15 to be done. And Halls of Atonement actually a really, really good dungeon for this as well. So you can see we're starting off with a pretty big pull here. These mobs are really nasty. You can see I'm just taking so much damage. The kind of name of the game in plus 15 keys is to just not be tanking as much as possible whenever there's trash, especially on this first week here with Fortified active. It felt like I was just dying if I was getting auto-attacked, so you'll see I do a tremendous amount of kiting this dungeon, especially in any pulls that include these little bears, these gargons. They apply a stacking bleed with their auto-attacks, and they sometimes get enraged when the Houndmaster finishes a Loyal Beast cast, and that makes them pretty close to one-shot, and I really, really want to avoid that. But luckily, the group comp that we're running is really good at helping me kite, right? We've got a Frost Mage to slow everything down. We've got 2 copies of Ursul's Vortex from our 2 Balance Druids, and we have 2 sets of trees from our 2 Balance Druids. So this comp, really nice for running away, but unfortunately you can see there that threat became an issue as Chow got meleeed to death on this pull, so that's the challenge with this strategy. And so usually the strategy that we're using on each of these pulls is I'm going to jump into the pack, use a bunch of damaging abilities, use some defensive abilities to tank while I'm in there. We'll use trees and stuff as well to take some damage for me while I'm doing that, and then I'll run away as soon as all that's down and keep kiting for the rest of the pull. Halls of Atonement, we also have Venthyr in our group. Chow is playing Venthyr Frost Mage, and so that means that we get to mind control these Loyal Stoneborns, and if you watch the damage meters here, or just watch the health bars of these enemies, you will see they get absolutely demolished every time that Loyal Stoneborn casts. Its damage scales with Keystone level, and I would not consider coming into this dungeon without a Venthyr player at this point if I was pushing a key. You could do it for a weekly key or whatever, a lower level key, but if you're actually trying to do a key that's difficult for your group, you can just look almost, I think more than half of Chow's damage on that pull was contributed by being a Venthyr and mind controlling that thing. The rest of our group comp, let's talk a little bit about that. So we've got me on Vengeance Demon Hunter. Vengeance Demon Hunter, really good for high damage, a lot of tools for kiting, and a lot of actual ranged threat making and burst threat making with the Elysian Decree sigil when that's available. Very, very, very squishy outside of Demon Spikes and meta. So it's very important that I basically don't get auto-attacked with any of that down. Like you can see right now, I don't have... Well, I could go into meta or use my Demon Spikes, but since I'm not choosing to do that, I'm not taking any autos. If I wanted to take any autos, I would need to make sure that I had those on. For healing, we have a Restoration Shaman here, which Restoration Shaman, actually a nerf was just announced for them as of the time of recording this, so they're going to get a 4% across the board healing nerf, plus an extra 10% to the, you can see there, as I jumped past it, I took 1 auto and nearly got removed from the video game. So the Restoration Shaman nerfs, I think it will still be a great healer choice for M+, with the nerf, but a little bit less dominant, especially with the Riptide legendary. Really, really strong choice for this kind of content. All right, so this is the seasonal affix here, Prideful. If you haven't played with this one yet, it triggers every 20% on the enemy forces meter. You'll see I actually have a WeakAura replacing you can see over on the right here, replacing, your keystone tracker. And it shows it actually shows how much count is in the pull that you're currently fighting, and it will highlight red if there's about to be a Prideful spawn. This is Relo's Mythic Plus Timer WeakAura, and I will have a link for it in the description below. Would absolutely recommend using this one if you're interested in... It's just a little bit more functional than the Angry Keystones and Gotta Go Fast because it has that like predictive count functionality. Here you can see I accidentally murdered Chow with the boast on this Prideful, which is really unfortunate. It's tough sometimes to avoid hitting members of your group there. You can see like I didn't really have a direction I could move where I would hit nobody. But not to worry, because once you kill the Prideful buff, you get a huge damage, healing, movement speed, and mana regen buff, and that makes some pulls possible that otherwise might not be. Here on this pull, we have the Shard of Halkias, which does a Thrash. It's a big AoE. And this, you can actually outrange, so you can see one of the big benefits of having a bunch of ranged players in our group is that after these first couple ones, they can just go all the way out of range of that and take no further damage from Thrash. But that means that I can't really effectively kite, right? Because if I kite, I'm going to be bringing it back into range of them. Collect Sins from the Collectors is also important. If you don't interrupt that, you're going to get a bunch of little ads spawning. And because most specs are target capped, our group's actually pretty uncapped, relatively, but Chow prefers it if we only have 5 targets in the pool, so spawning extra little ads is not great for that. He does have the Frost Mage Legendary, the one where your Ice Lances explode, is what he's playing in this dungeon, and it represents something like 20% of his DPS. Here we're grabbing these little Groundskeepers because we need them for count. If you want to see the route that we use, I'll have a link to that in the description below as well, at least the idea. We ended up splitting it into a few more bowls than in the MDT. But it's a good strategy. One of the nice parts about this dungeon is that you can basically do trash, like 80% of your trash, and then just do like 4 bosses in a row. And that works out really nicely because the dungeon is so wide open at the start that you can really choose which trash packs you want. You do have to kill all 3 of the Shards of Halkias, of course, to spawn the first boss, so that is an important thing to do, but we get to pick a route that lets us get as many of those Loyal Stoneborns on our side as possible. Bursting's also active this week. Bursting, a lot less harsh feeling than it used to, now that it's a flat damage instead of percent damage, especially as a tank. As a tank, it used to be that like at the end of a pull with Bursting, you'd be dying, and now, because it's flat damage, it's actually much less painful for a tank than for anybody else. All right, so this is our first Bloodlust. We didn't use a Bloodlust in the first Shard of Halkias because we had the Prideful buff, and now onto the second Shard of Halkias. This is going to spawn our next Pride, but we're going to use Lust to kill the Shard. You can see, again, the Thrash there is actually not damaging our players that are out of range, like Terracent. You can see is not taking damage, and the others were, unfortunately, taking a little bit of damage because they're in range. And here we have the trees and stuff coming out. This is really hurting. As soon as my Demon Spikes runs out here, things are going to be danger. You can see even with Demon Spikes up, I'm just getting punched here by these mobs. But once we have that dead, we can pull a little bit of extra trash. We have to be a little bit careful here because we know we're spawning Pride as soon as the Shard of Halkias dies. So it's something to worry about. And unfortunately, Chow goes down there to the Quake or a Volcano. So now we have to be really careful because I'm in this position that I described earlier as being a bad one, of kiting Shard of Halkias, despite it having that Thrash, which our players want to range. So now we've killed Shard of Halkias, but we still have 3 ads active. They only do tank damage, but it's obviously not a great situation to be in to not have your group being topped going into the Pride. So here, Prides, I would say, are least dangerous, especially to Vengeance Demon Hunter tanks. They don't melee that hard, and you can have spikes up pretty high on them, pretty high uptime on spikes against it, and you can use your other defensives. And then fighting a little bit of mobs that only do tank damage is usually safe with a Pride. Fighting any mobs that do any group-wide damage is banned because this thing just... Look what is happening to our group's health bars. We did have our healer go down here because the boastful, 4-direction thing connected, but even without that, it's really, really dangerous. You see we have another person going down, and this is turning into a bad situation. We've lost now 4 deaths in this combat, so... things were not great here. Needed to be a little bit more careful, I think, going into this one. All right, I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about my Vengeance Demon Hunter build, because I get a lot of questions about this when I'm streaming. So I get asked about why I'm not playing Spirit Bomb, what build I'm playing. I'm playing the Fiery Brand build with basically all the talents buffing Immolation Aura and Fiery Brand, and the Legendary that makes Soul Cleave reduce the cooldown on Fiery Brand. That's to survive in these high keys. Spirit Bomb doesn't add anything really meaningful to your defenses. It adds a little bit of leech to your attacks, basically, but nothing compared to going in on the Fiery Brand build. So this build is a little bit less damage, but Vengeance Demon Hunter is really high damage already, and so it's not too bad to be playing this setup in terms of how much damage you're losing, and it really does help you tank. Now, it's possible I could get away with the Fiery Brand build, given how much kiting we have in this group. Given how, I might be able to just go in, use my cooldowns, do a couple Spirit Bombs, do some more damage, and then go kite anyways. But I feel like even on bosses, the Fiery Brand build is really valuable. Bosses, especially on Fortified Week, a lot less dangerous than the trash is. All right, so we're into this next pull. Again, all 3 of our Shard of Halkias pulls are pretty nasty. They're Collector, Double Obliterator, and the Shard of Halkias itself. And our group's interrupts, we do have those 2 beams, and we have Sigil of Silence. But outside of that, of course, Boomkins don't have a good kick available all that often, so we have to watch out for that. I'm also not playing Sigil of Chains here. Sigil of Chains would be useful right at this moment, for instance, because I could Sigil into that Solar Beam and stop the cast from the other mobs. But this expansion, Quicken Sigils, is actually a pretty serious DPS increase because it scales up your Elysian Decree by reducing its cooldown. And Elysian Decree is a huge, huge percentage of your damage as this spec. Okay, so this is not going to spawn us our next Pride here, but you can see we're already way ahead on trash in this dungeon. If you look at the M+ timer here, it's not a perfect metric, but you can see I died here. I had my cheat death down from the previous pull, and happens. Sometimes you just get auto-attacked on Vengeance Demon Hunter when you can't kite. And again, like I said, this is one of the few packs where you really have a hard time kiting. Luckily, we have an Earth Elemental here, and that's going to make this survivable for a little while for me to get back. So a lot of good job here by the rest of the group to not turn this into a wipe, but it's a shame that I couldn't survive a little bit longer. Actually, the big problem was losing cheat on this previous pull. Okay, so like I was saying before, a good way to kind of check how your progress is doing in a dungeon is compare this top bar, which is the time, with the bottom bar, which is count. And if your count's ahead of your time, that's a good sign. And if it's the other way around, it's a bad sign. You do have to factor in the fact that bosses are included. Bosses don't give count, and they take a lot of time. And we've done no bosses here. But still, we're making good progress, right? We're done with more than half of our trash, and we've used only 10 of our minutes. And so that's definitely a good sign, especially on a fortified week where trash takes more time than usual. All right, so here we have these mobs just brutally casting on the group. And I can't really be in melee here, so I need to make sure that I keep threat on these mobs. You'll see I'm throwing out taunts, throwing out throw glaives, dropping sigils of flame when I can. There's one to keep threat on these guys, but it is a challenge, absolutely. But this is really the only way to deal with the Gargants. And we had to actually be careful with how we killed the mobs there to make sure that we didn't kill any of them too early to trigger this pride, right? Because this happens sometimes if you're pulling a pack that's going to spawn pride halfway through, you very rarely are comfortable spawning it until the pack's all dead. So you have to do this kind of bolstering, kill them all at the same time strategy. All right, so this pride's going down, and again, we're going to take this next pride buff into another trash pull, into a trash pull in the middle of the dungeon. Using prides on good targets is pretty important. It's pretty important to find something good to use your pride on. It doesn't have to be bosses every time, but at least not doing like a small or regular sized pull with every pride. Doing a little bit bigger is a really good way to get some value. Here we can see Link used, and the group's still just getting smashed. Once the pride damage really ramps up, once it gets to those 20 stacks, it is just demolishing the team. So it's oftentimes worth to throw some cooldowns on the pride. It's tough because you're kind of pulled in two directions, right? On the one hand, you want to use cooldowns to kill the pride faster. On the other hand, once the pride dies, you're going to get a damage buff. So multiplying your cooldowns with that damage buff is theoretically the best way to get the most damage over the dungeon. You can see I've died again there as I was trying to stand in and tank. Luckily, because we have a Venthyr player, the Venthyr Gargoyle is actually going to be top threat here while I'm running back, and so it's going to be tanking effectively for free here against a lot of these enemies, which is completely wild. Venthyr Gargoyle, again, look at those damage meters, so unbelievably strong. Unplayable dungeon without a Venthyr. So if you've got a group of 5 friends and none of these are Venthyr, you're going to have to kick your friend if you want to do a high key of this dungeon, unfortunately. And that's actually not the exception. Most dungeons are like that. This expansion, you need to have a person of the appropriate covenant if you want to do them at a high level. If you want to do them at a weekly key level, you know, if you have like 4 or 5 minutes to spare in your timer, then you can drop that person. But it really, I think it probably accounts for about 5 minutes of time in this dungeon, not counting the fact that it may have saved us from a full wipe there. Okay, so our next order of business is going to be to spawn another pride onto this first boss here. The first boss is spawned. We really want to make sure, though, that we do get that pride buff for it, though, because otherwise, if we do the boss and then we spawn our pride onto the second boss, we'll have to set up an annoying invis skip or pull some trash that we don't like. And anytime you're doing a skip while you have your pride buff ticking, that is a lot less valuable than if you can just go straight into the boss, right? So wherever possible, you want to set it up such that you don't have travel time while you're affected by the pride buff. If you need to do it, the pride buff does give you movement speed as well, but I would say it does not scale your travel as much as it scales your ability to do bosses. So I would try and focus on that. Now, even these little groundskeepers here, you can see I feel the need to kite them on this difficulty. They have this smack that they'll cast on you, and it does a lot of damage at this key level. So I'm standing back, making sure that I can go into this boss fight, into this pride, with my demon spikes all available as well. Because often what can happen on Vengeance Demon Hunter in these keys is you can deploy all your resources to finish a pull and then be completely dry going into the next pull with no demon spikes, no fiery brand, no meta, no fell devastation, and you'll be deleted, right? Or you'll have to wait to pull the next thing. So it's far better to kite at the end of the pull, rebuild up some resources, and then go into the next pull with all of your cooldowns available, right? And you can see right here, I'm basically requiring no healing on this pull. All the healing on this can be done as group healing which is the harder part of the Pride, and I'm taking care of myself because the Pride is not too dangerous for tanks, especially for Demon Hunter tanks, because I take so little magic damage by virtue of being this class, although I do very nearly die at the end here. All right, so we're going to grab the Halkias itself now. Need to make sure that everybody can get inside the circle as soon as this spawns. It's a very common thing in pugs for people to be late getting into the circle and then get chain feared. So make sure you get inside that circle to avoid the fear. You'll notice we ran and pulled another gargoyle from the other side here so that it can start contributing damage here. Gargoyles do a lot of AoE damage. They still do substantial single target as well, but they do way more. They have a Stone Breath ability that does a huge amount of AoE. They're still really valuable for bosses, but they are, I would say they're more valuable for trash pulls because they can really just nuke those trash pulls. You can see, though, it is helping Chow here on a kind of AoE build with an AoE legendary keep up with the single target, specialists, the Moonkins. Our Moonkin legendary situation, so let's go through the legendaries here real quick. As I mentioned earlier, I'm using the Fiery Brand one. Chow is using the Ice Lance Explosion one. Terrasant is using Balance of All Things, which is primarily a single target Moonkin one, but it's also got a lot of function in M+. It's not I would say it might not be the best M+ one, but it is a great M+ one, and it's the one he crafted for Raid. Whereas Cry hasn't crafted a legendary yet, so we're doing this with him not having a legendary. And Cuttlefish is using the one that gives you an extra Riptide every 4 Riptide casts, which is extremely strong, especially because the Necrolord class ability has an interaction with that, where you get, it basically counts as a Riptide for the purposes of that. Really, really, really powerful. Okay, so Halkias goes down here. You can see we've now got 13 minutes and 45 seconds to do 3 bosses, 20% trash, and 1 prideful. So we're looking pretty good on time here. This dungeon is pretty forgiving on the timer if you can avoid wiping fully. And even though we have 9 deaths on the board, none of them were too costly in terms of time, right? We had like 1 pull that went an extra minute because we were kind of slowly dying to it and dying to the Pride after. We had that middle pack where I died, but there we had the Venthyr Gargoyle bailing us out of being a problem, so ended up not being all that bad. We used Invis Pots to get here. Invis Pots are dramatically buffed this expansion relative to BFA because they don't take away 5 of your pre-pots anymore. They take away 1 of your combat potions. And the alternative as well has gotten weaker because Potion of the Psychopomp speed, the speed potion, is a lot weaker than Lightfoot potion. So really, even though the Invis Pots have the exact same functionality they did in BFA and in Legion, the opportunity cost has gone down by a huge amount. So it's a lot less of a bad thing to be using Invis Pots there. There you can see we barely landed a Star Surge on that thing right before the leap came through so that it could die. Great job by our Moonkins making sure that thing went down. So Echelon is a pretty challenging boss. It's a boss that can really punish groups with lower mechanical abilities. The main priorities on this boss are making sure that all the ads die on top of each other, making sure they don't chain cast on you for too long, making sure that nobody gets leapt on, ideally. If you need to, you can use a defensive for that, but luckily we have 4 curse dispels in this group. Everybody can dispel themselves or somebody else, except for me. So the way we're doing this is all of our DPS players are curse dispelling themselves, and then our healer is either dispelling herself or me, depending on who is targeted. And that, usually it'll be me that gets the dispel, but sometimes it needs to be her if she's got the circle on her. All right, so here's the next Stone Shattering Leap. One thing you can do is you can actually get out of this before it lands on you if you're not stunned, right? As soon as he finishes casting, he's locked in his position, and he will jump there to smash all the things in there. But you can get out before he lands. So even with a fast movement ability, if you're far enough away from Echelon, or with an instant teleport, something like a Heroic Leap or the Infernal Strike you saw me use will work to get away from that. Again, we've got all these ads here. We're throwing out interrupts to stop them from chain casting too much. It's really not a problem if they're casting on me. The main problem is if they start free casting on other people, or if they're casting on me while I'm also taking a lot of damage from the boss if my spikes are down or something. So that is Echelon, boss number 2. Now we get to move on to a very fun pull in the dungeon. This dungeon is... This pull with 3 Gargants is completely unreasonable to actually face tank for any serious amount of time here. You see, I'm going to go in. I'm already getting autoed for quite a bit. And then we've got trees coming out. I fire off my Fell Devastation. I'm just trying to make as much threat as I can here because I know that I'm not going to be tanking this pull for very long here. As soon as these trees go down, I am out of here. I'm not going to take any more auto attacks from these guys. This is the single scariest scariest pull in the whole dungeon for tanks, if you actually do have to be tanking them. Luckily, you can kite these. If you need to get threat though and stay in, it's really bad. I don't know what to tell you if you're having a hard time with threat on this pull. Besides, I have no idea what you're supposed to do here if you're like a low threat tank. Luckily, Vengeance can make quite a bit of threat, and that makes this a lot easier to handle. So we're kiting these things away. Really, really, really messed up pull. I don't know what you're supposed to do with it. Okay, next pull we have is actually one that can be pretty nasty. So that this next pull, there's this like anima fountain that'll shoot at us while we're doing it. Oftentimes groups will line of sight this back here, but then that makes dodging the anima fountain pretty rough. So I'm actually going to use my Sigil of Silence on those two casters, and then we'll fight them right here instead. And I'm using my meta. Generally on a fortified week as this spec, I found it was almost always best to lob all my cooldowns on trash and save very few for bosses. I almost never felt like I needed meta or Firebrand or Fell Devastation on bosses more than like the ones that would come up naturally during the fight. So I would basically never save those for boss fights, and I would always use them on trash on a fortified week. A couple of exceptions would be like Sanguine Depth's first boss. That one felt pretty nasty. Feels good to have access to some panic buttons for that one. But especially once your cheat death is no longer on cooldown, you just have so much extra wiggle room as a Vengeance Demon Hunter. So I really try to prioritize keeping the cheat death available such that I'll have it for any hard pulls. And that really lets you avoid needing to panic and press your buttons quite as often because you know you have that safety net behind you. All right, so here we've got these two different gargoyles. They've behaved a little bit differently. Every couple days they've received a little bit of a change, but right now you can actually mind control each of them separately. For a couple days you could mind control both of them at the same time, and then before that, when you mind controlled one, the other would like fly away. But as of right now, we can actually get both of them just at separate times. So again, we're going to mind control the first one, and then we're going to grab the second one from somebody with a ranged ability, jumping over here and sending over a ranged attack at them and grabbing it. And yeah, you can just look at Chaz damage and see that the Loyal Stoneborn here is really, really owning, making this boss fight last a lot less long. And so now that one's flown away, and so you can see he's going to go over there and toss an Ice Lance over at the one that's down that we didn't pull yet. And as soon as that comes up, I'm going to need to make sure that I taunt it so it doesn't kill anybody before it gets mind controlled. And so there it's taunted, casting the Stone Breath, and turned over to our side. And for the next 30 seconds, it'll be helping to kill this boss. This boss is not too bad. It's really important that you kite your spirit into the lantern as soon as possible. It does a ton of group-wide AoE as long as it survives. And so you just need to take it into that lantern very quickly. There are only 4 lanterns on the platform, but if you're worried about this one on a high key, new lanterns will actually spawn after the 5th. Like, after the 5th spirit spawns, a lantern will spawn as well that you can kite into. So it's not one of those fights where you've got like a hard DPS check that you're going to die afterwards. You will have infinite lanterns on this one, so don't worry about this one for high tyrannical purposes. Actually, it's not going to be as bad as probably the first 2 bosses in this dungeon. All right, so Inquisitor Sigar here, if you're in a low key, you can manage to kill this before it finishes its second heal cast. Just pump single target damage into it, pump cooldowns into it. That's absolutely a good use of your time. Luckily, we are in a group here with 2 Balanced Druids. Balanced Druids can do uncapped AoE here to all of these different souls in the room. And so we're going to be able to get through this room a lot faster than if we were playing with AoE capped specs, particularly with like melee target capped specs. This room really, really, really favorable towards ranged DPS and towards Balanced Druids. And even, really, really balance is a huge bonus for this room. So the fact that we have 2 Balanced Druids in our group is part of what makes this dungeon such an easy one for us, because we were able to, he gets a second heal cast off, but he's not going to get a third one. And all of those ads are already all gone. And now we get to kill the boss, because if there are any ads left when he casts his heal, he'll basically heal up to full. And not these little envy ads that spawn out of the ones that he heals, but the actual like parishioners that are locked in place, the tormented souls. Other than that, this thing doesn't really do much. You need to make sure that you don't stand in the little blood pools if you're a DPS. They do a lot of damage to DPS players. Those spawn when Sigar channels on one of the envy ads, and they'll have a little AoE around them indicating it's about to spawn. It's not like an instant one-shot, although at this key level it is a couple ticks will actually kill a DPS player. Nothing, of course, to Avengers Demon Hunter because it's magic damage. Once this dies, we're going to spawn our final Pride of the dungeon. Again, there's Relo's M+ WeakAura indicating that's going to happen, right? We're going to get plus 20 count. which is going to bring us over 100%. And it's highlighted red, indicating that we're about to get a prideful spawn. Cannot recommend this WeakAura enough. You may not like the visual of it as much as the other ones, but I think that in terms of functionality, it really does beat out the other options. You do need to have MDT installed for it to read how much count everything gives, though, so make sure that you do that if you want this to have that functionality. So now we get the last pride of the dungeon. There's really no way to avoid having this pride here, but it's not like you'd even want to if you could, because taking the pride onto the last boss is almost always worthwhile. Last bosses tend to have a bit more health than the other ones in the dungeon. This one is actually not a bad last boss in terms of extra health, right? There are some last bosses this expansion that will spawn a bunch of adds or have a bunch of extra health and phases and stuff. And this last boss, you can basically just damage him for free as a single target the whole way through. So he doesn't really scale up in terms of how much time he takes. Unlike some of the other bosses, though, like last boss of Plaguefall with all those adds that spawn that need to soak some damage, or not even the last, but that one boss in Theater of Pain that spawns banners every 30 seconds that have a 10% of his health that you need to deal to kill them. But here, yeah, Lord Chamberlain, just 2 million HP here on this plus 15. Really simple boss, actually, in terms of mechanics. You just need to watch out for the statues, which will one-shot at this key level. They will point at where they are looking, or where they're going to go. So when he channels on them, you just need to look at the direction the statue's turned, and then don't be in that direction relative to it. Stigma of Pride does quite a lot of magic damage, so I'm going into my demon form here with Fell Devastation to help heal through it. It really does actually kind of chunk. Even on Vengeance Demon Hunter, you'll feel it, and you will want to use some healing to get through it. On something like a warrior, it is a brutal nightmare to have that dot on you. Now here comes the Door of Shadows, and you just want to get out for this when he pulls in the statues, and then get into a nice spot here to avoid it. If you're really precise, you can actually stand between two of these lines and soak two of them at once if you get right under the boss's hitbox. We're not attempting that at this key level, because sometimes when you try to do that, it will cause a couple ticks to go off on the statue while you're getting it right. And we decided that was probably the most likely way for us to wipe here, was by trying that and having it go wrong. But once everybody's really confident with doing that, I think that's going to be a really common strategy to reduce the damage on your group, because I think it only gives you one stack of the debuff as well, so you effectively take half damage from those two beams. If you don't know what happens here, if you don't soak all four of those beams, when it touches one of the statues, it will explode for the same damage as if it was soaked, but on the whole group. Other than that, there's really not too much to this boss fight. If you're used to this on M0, you won't see a lot of the mechanics because he just keeps doing this phase. Yeah, there's the explosion on the whole group. Went off with just 2 ticks, and there's another tick, and now the link needs to come out to keep everybody up. And there's a lot of extra group-wide damage coming through there. This boss does also have a frontal that will be aimed at random players, and he has an AoE around it. But because he phases every 30% of his health bar, if you're doing enough DPS to him, you will never see those mechanics. So that might be something you're used to if you've done this boss a lot on M0. But there's the 15 Halls of Atonement all finished up. I hope you found this video interesting, helpful. Let me know if you have any questions about what we did, what our strategy was. I tried to answer them all throughout this video. And if you have any questions about them, I'll try and have FAQs in the description as well. And yeah, let me know if you like this video, want to see some from other dungeons. I have a couple other dungeons from this push that were recorded as well, although none of them were 15s. A lot of them were 14s. we depleted our fair share of 15s on the way to this one. So yeah, check out my stream, twitch.tv/Dratnos. And thanks everybody for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.